When I spoke in the parliament, it is an academic. People said that, see, he's talking like as if it is his classroom. That's why some of my friends from the other party criticized me on social.
They criticized because they did not have any class.
They wrote something like this: "ये उसको बताना पड़ेगा, ये JNU ने ये बोला." It's not his classroom. He's quoting Nandi and like post-colonial theories and so on. No, the fact of the matter is, I said I can't help it. This is the vocabulary through which I see things.
You should have told them, I can become an MP, but you cannot become a professor.
So what I'm saying is to remind all of you that Manipur is going through an unprecedented crisis in this country. It is comparable to what happened in Rwanda in some sense, or when the Yugoslavia was breaking down. My pain has turned into anger. You were not even aware of that one. As you keep on asking, where is Manipur? But I'm telling you, as a student, I've seen, I asked one of my friends, he said, where are you from? I said, it was in Pune, 1980s. I said, I'm from Manipur. Then I just turned him, I said, do you know where Manipur is? Yeah, I know. It's near Korea, no? And that knowledge continues even in 2001, 2, 3 on national TV. Army generals comes up on the national TV and says all the state in the northeast is carved out of Assam, which is factually wrong. Manipur was a princely state with 11 gun salute, was a member of the Chamber of Princes. It's not carved out of Assam. They didn't have this idea. And then, one expert will come in something. Well, this Naga rebel group led by Isaac Muiba, Mr. Isaac Muiba. He doesn't even realize that Isaac and Muiba are the surname of 2 different people. But he thinks it's one person. So, this faction led by Mr. Isaac Muiba. That kind of expertise has been going on in the Northeast. It's a tough job. So I think we have a lot of issues. So your own question is not been able to figure it out, that most of these categories are rooted in false colonial categories, and the violence continues, the same thing based on that one. First of all, thank you so much. I think this is my first engagement in the campus after I got elected to the Lok Sabha. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm in politics. But I think most of you are already in electoral politics. Don't forget that this is something that I've been telling in my constituency when I campaign. Because people say that they are going to lose an academic and intellectuals, as they say, who's very vocal on social political issues. You're going to join the dirty water of politics and we're going to lose. That's the kind of sadness that many people have talked about me, both inside the campus as well as outside, my well-wishers, not only from Manipur, from outside. But some people say that people like you must come into what we call it politics. So I said that electoral politics, we all partake as the voter. There are persons who contest elections as candidates, and some people vote for it. So by definition, we are all partaking in electoral politics. That's something that I want to clarify. And 2, the way I understand politics, I mean, those of you from political science will understand this. If you look in Aristotelian sense of the word, it is a normative aspect of our existence. This is the very logos of our existence. There is something that we all strive for, what ought to be, what is a good life, what should constitute a good life. That search for this through a collective action, as Hannah Arendt would put it, through actions. That's what politics is. So all of us have to be political. If you completely depoliticize yourself, you are back to bare life. The zoe, as Aristotle will talk about, the animal. Not the animal with an additional life of political life. He said in Aristotle expression, you call it zoon politikon. The political animal. So you don't become political animal. I think that's the fear that people like Hannah Arendt have been arguing, that the moment we depoliticize ourselves, there is a rise of the social in her classic work called The Human Condition. There's a chapter on that, you can see that one. So to be political is to be human. So I mean, there's a second aspect that we must understand. Given these 2 aspects, there are certain circumstances in life, you do political all the time. I'm a very political animal right from my school days. In JNU, though, I'm not a JNUite as a student, but many people got confused as if I was a product of JNU because I was very active in political in the campus, even though I wasn't a member of the campus. I keep on coming for campaigning here. And even as a faculty, while I was serving in DU and then to CSDS, where I served for Yogen, he talked quite a lot. Yogen is a friend and colleague of mine in CSDS. I was there for 9 years before I came to JNU. So I came here for your talks. This generation of students must not have seen. There was something called post-dinner talks. And I used to be very active. So I'm very political. I spoke out, very, very vocal. So I am political. So only thing that differentiates me now is that I stood as a candidate and won the election. That too, luckily for me, an unprecedented margin in the history of Manipur. It's a very small constituency with barely around 9 lakhs. I think they said that I was one of the highest in the country also in terms of the vote share. So there's a massive, and I can tell you that youths particularly were behind me. They said they're looking for a different kind of politics, and this is my plank. I'm not your normal politicians. Don't expect me to do things that you're more familiar with. So that kind of a thing I have done it. In the campus also I was very political, and many of you must be knowing it, so senior students and others. And I was very tempted to make a comment on the tea part of that anecdote. You know, poor people drink red tea and intellectuals take black teas. There's a difference between red and black. I mean, sudden shift in the color of the tea in your speech is very revealing to me. Whichever caste, whichever class, intellectuals are part of the elites, if you really wanted to call it. So the tea becomes black, not red. So red would be for the poor people. And again, warning you, don't read it in terms of your own interpretation within the campus. The downtrodden and blah, blah, blah is red kind of thing. I'm not reading it in that sense. So I think my orientation, I have no qualm in saying that I am left of the center in my political orientations. I'm proud to be a liberal left or left liberal, whichever one you want to call it. So when I talk about politics, what I wanted to say in this topic that's given, it struck me the way I take. I can see some of my students here. I've always said that there must be, education should be looked upon as a conversation between life and letter. जब तक आपको जो theory है जिंदगी में आप जोड़ नहीं सकते, then your knowledge is a bogus, it's a dissociative knowledge. You should constantly try to have a conversation with your life experiences, with the categories, the concepts, the theories that you learn. And you will see that the kind of intellectual work you do will qualitatively shift the moment you begin to do that. So whenever my PhD student comes to work under me, I normally say, they come with a preconceived topic and so on. I say, no, don't do this. You just write whatever you're concerned. I say, write about sex is part of you. Write anything, your discomfort, excitement about that. And second, I said, your gender identity. Write anything about that. Then I said about your social identity. It could be caste, it could be, then ultimately write something about being an Indian. And ultimately try to write what is to be a human being. And what are your concerns, right? I give them around about 1 month. Go on, write. I said, these are called trying to be in touch with yourself. All the research topic that you will be formulating will not fall outside of these concerns. The job as an academic we do is that how these concerns are repackaged in intellectual terms, and then we investigate the issues. That is to have a non-alienating experience of doing research. Otherwise, your teacher deciding your topic and a fashionable thing that you get to hear, this is exactly what Marx was describing as alienation of the labor. You get alienated from your own labor as well as product of your labor, you will not be able to own up your PhD. If you do this kind of an existentially rooted work, then you will think that your PhD is unique. There's nothing like your PhD, even if it works on the same topic by another person. There will be a personal flavor to the work. And that's the kind of a work that you do it. Okay, so I think Professor Tulsi Ram's approach, as Prasad was saying it, is exactly that kind of an orientation. This is something in US in the 60s, they called it humanistic pedagogy. You have Paul Ferrera's take on education, the pedagogy of the oppressed. These are something that I keep on sharing with my students. And some of you, if you're familiar with Western songs, there is a lovely video which I interpret and dissect in the classroom called Another Brick in the Wall. It's a lovely, you can actually decipher that 4 or 5 minutes long music video using Roland Barthes' idea about visual as a text, and then you can read it and what does education mean. All the books that you read about Paulo Ferreira and all of them comes in there. Okay, so that's one part that I would like to place in front of you why I'm speaking. I'm still a teacher, by the way. Yeah. And it's my primary identity. It's in my bone marrow. And thankfully, because of new rules, I can continue teaching in the campus despite being a MP. That's also a new development. So I'll be still teaching, though my workload will be adjusted. Okay, so let me say a little briefly about Dalit politics and so on. You know, this is something, very honestly speaking, I wasn't aware of Dalit's concern. It was around 25 years back I became aware, the day I joined CSTS. That's the time I began to sense what is this Dalit question is. I was aware of Hindu-Muslim issues, and I was very passionately involved with the issues of India's Northeast, particularly the question of race. I have been raising these questions, and the understanding that I've achieved through my conversations, my reading, and my listening to people, I try to look from my own vantage point, and I try to formulate this. I think the first publication came in 2006. I wrote a piece where I said Dalit's experience can be described as, I borrowed this expression from Giorgio Agamben, a well-known Italian thinker. And I says Dalit's experience is exclusion by inclusion. They are included precisely because they are included. In the case of the Northeast, it's thus the reverse. It is inclusion by exclusion. This is through a process of exclusion, only the Northeast could be reclaimed as a part of India. That is called, I said, inclusion by exclusion. Whereas in the case of the Dalit, it is just the reverse. It is exclusion by inclusion. It is the facticity of being included in the social more or the social fabric of this place. You're being excluded. And that is, I sense that that's why Baba Sahib Ambedkar was trying to move out of that inclusion and his search for conversion. I see it as an attempt to move out of that particular inclusion which makes them experience these exclusion experiences. So that is the way I see in my understanding, a comparative understanding. And as Durkheim would often remind you, the best way to understand certain things is through a comparative method and see how often you can check it. And my former colleague Dipankar Gupta once told me that, Bimol, you have worked too much on the Northeast, just try to move to Maharashtra where you have some experience also, try to work there. And then you will see, I think it is a very constructive suggestion that you move out of that one and try to see the other's experience. This has a theoretical as well as an existential concern, which Vivek has been arguing it. And for me, it's not a completely settled issues. I've seen this in feminists. Can men be a feminist? Can I speak for women? Can I speak for a Dalit? Even though I am not a Dalit, even though I am not a woman, is it possible for me to speak for them? So that is an ontological issue as well as epistemic. It is a heated debate, you know, the issues around standpoint epistemology in social sciences. But some people say you may speak for them, but you can definitely speak for them. But your voice will not be the voice of. So there's a difference between of versus from. But then again, it invites a problem that how do we achieve intersubjectivity to coexist? If there is no possibility of me having this capacity for empathy, or whoever calls it firstahan, to get into the shoes of the other. I mean, as famously says, for instance, you don't have to be Caesar in order to understand Caesar, is one of his famous lines. So these are some of the things that you as students and existentially you keep on thinking about it. And when I relate with my tribal brothers and sisters in back home, and they looked upon me as a non-tribal. Interestingly, these categories in themselves are very interesting again, because my community is now demanding for inclusion in the ST. And so what constitute ST and what not ST is a very interesting way. A lot of debates around that. I can see how certain colonial baggages are still implicated the moment you're trying to define yourself in this. So these are interesting epistemic intellectuals, but deeply connected to my existential frame, which I have been engaging as an academic for more than 20-25 years of my life. Now, the other aspects of the issue that I want to clarify when we think about Dalit politics, besides these epistemic issues and so on, is the context of the politics. Here I would like to frame in terms of not two different kinds, but like as Judith Butler would suggest, that gender is a spectrum. There's a continuum in that one. It's not two different kinds. So if you really look at that in a fascist on one end and the liberals on the other end, you can see this is a spectrum. So there is a political context marked by these two spectrums. And I think the politics that we do will differ depending on what is the context within which we are doing our politics. So if it is a fascist, you must understand that they are extremely reliant on state. It is to use state to implement their projects by utilizing the disciplinary power of the state. And in that process, in their model, more often than not, there is a hegemonic homogenizing tendency, and what is considered to be infirmities as well as the other becomes the they become the site where the violence has been perpetrated. Look at eugenics science that appeared in Europe and how it converted fascists in Italy as well as Nazis in Germany, and how they treated homosexuals, the differently able people, how they look at women as nothing but a child-producing machine, and so on. So all these things are part of the fascist projects. Within this, Dalit or any other marginalized group will experience certain kind of different forms of politics that you encounter. Unlike that, if I give you the other spectrum of liberal, where the right of the individuals, then you have a derivative right from there called a group differentiated rights and group right and so on. And there you might find a very different kind of a politics to engage with. They are more accommodative in one sense or the other. I'm not counting the libertarian or the anarchist, like Karl Hass's well-known essay, which incidentally appeared in the Playboys in March edition of 1969, The Death of Politics. That kind of a libertarian or an anarchist position, I'm not talking about it, that by far they are at the margin of the real politics. But broadly speaking, we have this spectrum from fascist to liberal projects. And I think we need to realize how the Dalit politics is being carried out. And you need to know today's India is different from the Indias of 1940s and 50s and 60s and so on. So I think when Dalit leaders think about politics, we need to keep in mind the context within which our politics is being engaged and manifested. And it throws up different kind of challenges. That's something that I would think about it. The other one is if we take a postmodern or post-structuralist positions and think that there should not be an essentialization of identities, then you can see that all these identities are nothing but a form of mobilization. It is basically a form of mobilizations, of course, rooted in the empirics of history as well as socio-economic conditions. There are concrete conditions. If you want to use Marxist phrase, then it becomes the concrete conditions within which your mobilization is being carried out. So there is nothing artificial about this mobilization at that level. But I'm saying that there should not be an essentialization of these identities, that there is a diversity within these identities and these interests. I remember my former colleague, D.L. Sheth, who was, I think, member of Mangal Commission. He was a sociologist in CSCS. He once told me that in Bimol we must define identity as interest, and I found it very interesting. Identity is nothing but interest. So I think when we mobilize that in certain kind of confluence of interest at a given point in time, and this politics is mobilized on that one, the kind of fractured nature that Vivek talks about it is because the concrete condition changes. When you start a movement, there is certain rationale that drive that movement, but you must remember that all social movement produces its own rationale once the movement begins. So the a priori conditions which have resulted into the mobilization of the movement have changed, or if you wanted to use in the Marxist revolutionary vocabulary, the revolutionary condition have changed. So the condition before the emergence of people like Ambedkar is bound to have changed once he appeared on the scene and so on. So since the concrete conditions have changed, a new form of interest might begin to appear. And I think it is the responsibility of the Dalit leadership to tap on those different interests and still try to maintain certain kind of reconfigured form of mobilization to sustain the movement. With this, I want to end my comment by saying that as we exist in a multicultural context and multiple identities, I think not only recognizing the diversity within, but the capacity for coordinated action is very important in politics. I think that is itself the definition of politics as an action in Hannah Arendt's terms is not a solitary act. It is always actions with somebody else. So therefore, if the politics in itself is always an action rooted in these co-action sort of things together with another fellow being, it's not a solitary act. I think if you keep that perspective, in countries like India, it is also important for Dalit leadership to sort of co-act together with other identities and staff lists and constantly. So I think the leadership of the movement must have this sensitivity as well as capacity to realign not only the new rationale and interest that appear once the movement begins and to change revolutionary conditions, but also with the other interest group not mobilized through these identities. And one must be able to have co-actions with them together to achieve at least a modicum or the semblance of justice in our society. And I think it is the same thing. You can see, I want to end by this, Dalits are much more visible than people in the Northeast. And that's why I say it is excluded. When I spoke in the parliament, it is an academic. People said that, see, he's talking like as if it is his classroom. That's why some of my friends from the other party criticized me on social
They criticized because they did not have any class.
They wrote something like this, ये उसको बताना पड़ेगा, ये JNU ने ये बोला. It's not his classroom, he's quoting Nandi and like post-colonial theories and so on. No, the fact of the matter is, I said I can't help it. This is the vocabulary through which I see things.
You should have told them, I can become an MP, but you cannot become a professor.
So what I'm saying is to remind all of you that Manipur is going through an unprecedented crisis in this country. It is comparable to what happened in Rwanda in some sense, or when the Yugoslavia was breaking down. My pain has turned into anger, and it has consolidated my understanding that I've sinned. I've served this country as a faculty in Delhi University, CSDS, and JNU for 31 years now of my life. My family members have said if blood get President's Award and so on. But I know that I've said once, it is quite okay for post-colonial theorists like Partho Chatterjee and Nandi to say that India was born in 1947 and it came to this idea of nation state, came to this part of the world riding piggyback on Western colonialism and all. But the moment a guy like me with this eye and this nose speaks, it becomes a question of national loyalty. You understand this? This is something that I have been facing now that I am a member of Parliament. And I said this often in your JNU campus, post-dinner talk or political campaign. Some of you are old enough to be here, still hanging out. You will understand I have used this word. Just as the proof of loyalty lies with the wife under a sexuality defined under patriarchal lens and institutions built upon those ideas, the burden of proving loyalty lies with the woman, not with the man. In a similar sense, a nationalism which has been articulated, an institution being built on the so-called national mainstream, the proof of loyalty, the burden of loyalty lies with the other. And the Northeast Indian people are one of those things. And the fact that despite 60,000 people are linguistic in Relic camp, unprecedented, bureaucracy is splitted, police is splitted, Indian armed forces have been accused of siding one group or the other, and yet the Indian state remains a mute spectator and allows this violence can only come from what I have begun, which is inclusion by exclusion. You're fundamentally excluded, and that's why you don't feel. And I did ask a journalist, national within court, he asked me, why is that Prime Minister is quiet? What do you think? I turned the question, I said, just listen, if this crisis had happened in the so-called heart of the nation like Madhya Pradesh, Bihar or UP, do you think the rest of the country or the government of India would allow it to go on like this? And he shook his head like this. I said, you must answer your question yourself. And this is 75 years within which 31 years of my life as an academic professional, another decade as a student outside my home state. I have experienced, and it continues to be the same. So you think that Dalits have suffered for centuries. A living example that you should, this is where I said capacity for empathy. If you're a marginalized, you should have the capacity to feel the other. And you can speak for the Northeastern people as well. It should not be the responsibility of the people from the Northeast to speak for themselves. Women, we must speak for them. And similarly, I as a person from that part of the world, so practically I have stayed more than half of my life outside my home state. So I think in real politics should be rooted in the fundamental quality of human empathy and the courage and the conviction to stand up for one's own right. And that should guide all kinds of politics, including Dalit politics. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just put off. Thank you.
You know, I'm just going back to the caste issues. The little that I know is that there is one thing that we must keep, just as I said, that the context within which we do politics. I was trying to give you a framework by looking at kind of a spectrum from liberalism to fascism. What kind of a political context within which you conduct your politics is very crucial, because that throws up different kind of challenges. So another aspect that we need to look at is the relationship between state and society. It's very crucial that, you know, and what are the historicity of these moments when this relationship between society and, you know, state changes. If you look back in Annihilation of Caste by Ambedkar, for example, and you can see in his utterances on that, when he was pressed to what is his preference, whether he preferred political transformation over social transformation or social transformation over political transformation, he clearly says that he is looking for social transformation. He is not looking for political transformation. Ultimate goal is social transformation. Now here is the challenge. Why did I say that there is a relationship between the state and society? How do you see that? In third world countries like ours, the state is positioned as the prime mover of change. which is not the case in European structures now, in the Western countries. So you should see that the Indian way of looking at social transformation, if we still position state as the prime mover of change, unlike in settled democracies in the West, so we need to refigure our own dynamics within society and state. So I would prefer that, see, reservation is fine. This is one of the political structure that you've introduced. But जब तक आप societal level में आप लोग invest नहीं करोगे in terms of education, health, and all these things, don't look only on the data on the number of seats being filled in, which is important. I think that's what Vivek was emphasizing. Rather than having a false normative judgment on the Dalit community, it's preferable for us to look at the concrete analysis of the concrete condition. What is the actual condition of these reservation policies, how many seats have been filled in, and what are the factors behind it. So along with that, we need to look at very critically the kind of investment that we do on education and health. Such committee has thrown up some issues on this. If you look at where the concentration of Muslims are located, this kind of investment is lesser. You see, so you are depriving at the level of society at one level. So I think we must keep in mind, and when looking at the emancipation of the marginalized communities, we must look at the social structures and what kind of emancipatory role is being played by the state in terms of injecting concrete material stuff. Investment on education and health is one thing I keep on thinking about it. But at the same time, there's affirmative action. I think we need to have this concrete data. Otherwise, this judgment of some creamy layers eating up everything, I think that kind of a judgment should have been avoided. I mean, that's a normative pronouncement rather than looking at the empirics of the issues. I think the empirics is important for me. So that's a note on what I think about this gossip. The other part is never forget that I strongly believe that there is certain something political about intellectual life. Okay? This is in fact the opening line of the book that I'm working on. In my book, I said there is something political about the intellectual life, because very transformation of the discourses and unpacking of the categories, just as Sensi has just done it, meritocracy as a category. What does this mean? So this very intellectual enterprise of unpacking categories and in Foucault's sense, you call it discursive formation, which produces certain kind of reality, certain kind of truth. I think this intellectual engagement in itself, like Vivek's voice, is political. So it's an intellectual act which is essentially political in nature. I think which is required for our social transformation. It's not only about winning elections and being in the party and so on. I think politics must be seen much more wider than what we have tried to confine into a particular domain. So I think that's the way I understand about these issues. As for your take on Assam and others, there's a serious issues. Lot of colonial categories and their mapping, particularly the one they started introducing post mid 19th century. After that, Sepoy Mutiny and so on. It is the emergence of what we call it in social science, the modern state in South Asia. The rationale of the modern state, the classificatory schemes, the disciplinary regimes, all of these things were injected, and many of these identities were reconfigured, and the relationship has been shaped by that one. We need to remember this. So one of the things that have harm in the Northeast particularly is that you are saying the Assam model should be applied. No, it's not. When you say, if you look back at the geological theory about how Himalayan ranges were formed, the collision, say 50 million years ago between the Indian plate and the Eurasia plate, and people are still saying there's some millions years, 2-3 million years, UP will disappear, the Sikkim will disappear because it is going inside the plate and so on. So if that process, if you see the formation of the Himalayan states, Manipur is part of the mountainous regions, but the falsehood of the European category is that they think that Brahmaputra Valley and its relationship with the surrounding Himalayan ranges like the Naga Hills and so on is exactly the same relationship between, say, Imphal and Churachandpur, which is one is the tribal and non-tribal. So the fact of the matter is, Imphal is 800 meters above sea level. Churachandpur is barely 900. is part of the same mountain formation. If you look at the Shivalik region in Uttarakhand, for example, look at Nainital and these places is as high as Imphal. How is the Nainital becomes hill and the Imphal becomes a valley? And Brahmaputra Valley, Guwahati is 50 meters high and Naga Hills is 1,400. You understand, there are hill districts in Manipur which is lower than Imphal. So this false category that they have injected simply because they found that the valley people were Hindu, why something like the rest of the Hindustan as they see that. So they call it this is civilized and the rest of the hill are savages and naked tribes. So these are classificatory schemes that have become the foundation for the discourse and the lens through which we look at ourselves. So much of this conflict has to do with this colonial category, and instead of debunking them and reversing it, the post-colonial Indian state continues the same thing.
Reification.
And then 1965 in the National Development Council, about general in India, they were thinking about the development of hill areas. So they have formed a committee, 1965 National Development Council, and what they have arrived is certain criteria to see what is an hill area in the country and which is not. Depending on their criteria, what they have arrived at is two categories of state. One they call it hill state, the other they call it state with hill areas. जो पूरा एक हिल स्टेट है ना, और दूसरा जो स्टेट उसमें हिल एरिया है, तो उसमें जम्मू एंड कश्मीर, हिमाचल प्रदेश, उत्तराखंड, सिक्किम, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, Meghalaya, these are classified as hill state. And in state like Assam and Kerala, they are called state with hill areas. So these are the schemes that they have implemented, and the Fifth Planning Commission started using this category for the planning process. You understand this one? So in this process, Manipur may you still have this falsity of a hill state, which is declared by the Planning Commission as a hill state in terms of administration, but constitutionally in other legal structure, still you impose something called a valley and a hill, and valley is equated with plain, and the differences I told you is barely 100 meters, 50 meters, that kind. So these are false categories that have been applied, and because of these colonial categories, I've written one of my publications, this is again 2005, there's something called Ghost Colonial Modernity. I've written this in one book, it's a chapter. And there I argue much of the conflict in India, particularly in the Northeast, is because of these colonial categories in the discourses which we use as a lens to look at ourselves. Typically what male gaze is all about. The way women look at their issues and their body is exactly the way a man would look at them. That kind of thing. So we are using this category. So rather than applying Assam model, it should be reversed. It's the falsely applied, particularly in Manipur. My last comment, if you are familiar with northeastern states, there is a place called Dimapur in Nagaland, which has the railway head and the airport. This is a completely plain area, barely around 100 meters above the sea level. And the Naga Hill starts, the western side is roughly around 600 meters, and it's like the Shivalik regions. Then moves towards the northeastern side in Nagaland district, which rises up to something like 1,500 meters and so on. So Dimapur is part of Nagaland, and Dimapur is part of hill area. Though it is 130, and Imphal, which is 800 plus meter, is a valley area, which is a ridiculous way of looking at things. Am I making sense? So these are certain colonial categories that we still continue in this country. That's why I was trying to remind the Prime Minister that there is a continuity between the colonial and the post-colonial in South Asia, which is what Partho Chatterjee and other scholars have been saying it. Much of our practices are rooted in British time. Our lenses are still British. And this government is trying to unpack and reverse these colonial categories. They introduced these three rules, these laws, criminal laws, and trying to seemingly unpack and reverse the colonial categories. But they still continue that. And I gave you a classic example, which is something that I have been writing for the last 30 years. Remember that European scholarship and colonial discourses never consider India as a part of historical subject. Battle of Plassey is the first time that India pops up as a historical subject in world history. Simply because Europeans started ruling this place after the Battle of Plassey. Otherwise, India, like the rest of the non-European, is an anthropological subject. You see, am I making sense? But I have been saying this in India, you look in the scholarship, whether it is university or anywhere, Northeastern subjects will be found in the indexes. All of them will be in anthropology. Major chunk is not part of history because this is the Hegelian notion. People with history and people without history. So you consider Northeast as outside of the modern civilized, and therefore it's primitive, and therefore it's an anthropological subject. That's why you guys are not taught about Northeastern history. You said the longest serving empire in India, probably you will pop up something like Mughal dynasty. You will forget there is an Ningthi dynasty in Imphal who ruled that state for 2,000 years, or the Ahom which ruled more than 600 years. You were not even aware of that one. As you keep on asking, where is Manipur? But I'm telling you, as a student, I've seen, I asked one of my friends, he said, where are you from? I said, it was in Pune, 1980s. I said, I'm from Manipur. Then I just turned him, I said, do you know where Manipur is? Yeah, I know. It's near Korea, no? And that knowledge continues even in 2001, 2, 3 on national TV. Army generals comes up on the national TV and says all the state in the northeast is carved out of Assam, which is factually wrong. Manipur was a princely state with 11 gun salute, was a member of the Chamber of Princes. It's not carved out of Assam. They didn't have this idea. And then, one expert will come in something. Well, this Naga rebel group led by Isaac Muiba, Mr. Isaac Muiba. He doesn't even realize that Isaac and Muiva are the surname of two different people, but he thinks it's one person. So, this faction led by Mr. Isaac Muiva. That kind of expertise has been going on in the Northeast. It's a tough job. So I think we have a lot of issues. So your own question is not been able to figure it out, that most of these categories are rooted in false colonial categories, and the violence continues, the same thing based on that one.